Diagnosed with ME after 6 months of being bedbound. Basically, I was told that there was nothing that they could find or do for me and that I needed to go home and rest. They thought it'd be a virus and that I had to just go home and rest and I would get better. I went home. I was living with my parents at that time. This is when I'm 21, by the way. I was then in bed for 2 years.
Bedbound in terms of like, you didn't move, like you was literally like, you couldn't do anything then?
Yeah, so those 2 years, the first 6 months I was at my worst. I wasn't able to have a light on really. I was very sensitive to light. I couldn't watch TV, read, text, write. I could hardly put a sentence together. So I was really struggling in that first 6 months.
Overwhelmed with the response? Was you really happy with the response to the cookbook when you launched it?
No, I was very proud of to walk in a Waterstones, and that was always my vision. Like I wanted to walk into Waterstones and see my face on a shelf. Like that was when I sort of...
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was when I thought, okay, if I can do that, then I've done all right.
Do me a massive favour and click follow or subscribe button. It helps the podcast out so much. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Make Insane podcast. I'm joined by James, the founder of Healthy Living James. Would you just like to do like a bit of introduction, James, to kind of your blog and your platform?
Thanks for having me on, Dan. So yeah, like you said, Healthy Living James is the sort of brand name that I go under. I started my blog 6 years ago, roughly. So I set up a website, social media, and at first I sort of was doing it for a bit of fun, I guess, sharing some recipes that I had taught myself how to make, which I'm sure we'll get into. So I set up my socials, started posting recipes, and it just started growing, and I just kept going with it really, and published a book last year called Healthy Living James. So that was packed full of some of my best recipes and a lot of new recipes. And it's been a really fun journey.
Yeah, no, it's been incredible to see it grow. Obviously, you've got over kind of 1 million followers now across like your different platforms. If we go back, I always find it quite interesting with the guests. If we go back to kind of like the start of your journey, but what was the kind of south of England like, obviously growing up as a kid?
Really good. Like I had an amazing upbringing. I was really sort of hyper, crazy, nuts kid. I had too much energy basically, which is quite funny because when we go into my story, it was the complete opposite. But I had tons of energy, and actually I channeled a lot of that energy into sport. That was like my release, I guess. I couldn't sit still. So like for me, sport was such an amazing thing to be able to do. In school, I was so hyper that I was being chucked out of class nearly every day. Like I was really struggling academically. And actually my parents decided to put me into private school when I was about 9 or 10, I think, maybe 8, 9, 10, something like that. Just because I was just not going to get an education otherwise, because I was just getting chucked out all the time. And I found out later that I was quite dyslexic, and I clearly needed more attention than I was going to get.
How was that experience, obviously being 9, 10, going to private school? Was that quite daunting, being quite very young at the time?
Yeah, it was quite difficult actually. Maybe I was a little bit older actually, because I think I was already playing golf, and I started golf when I was 10. So maybe it was like 11 or 12, but it wasn't easy. Like changing schools for anyone's pretty difficult. And then from going from state to private is actually quite a change. Like I found state school quite lenient, and then going into private school, it was very strict, like quite strict. Like you couldn't get away with the things that I was getting away with.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's funny because you'd think it would be the other way around, because like your sort of parents are obviously paying for it, so they sort of it was really different experience, and it definitely sorted me out a bit. And private school, I got sport every day, and that was crucial for me, like being able to use my energy to play sport, whereas in state school I wasn't getting that every day. So that was a big plus for the private school for me.
It's quite interesting. I had a conversation with one of my friends from uni, and she's recently started dating a guy, and he basically he came from private school, and he was saying he has a conversation with his friends about whether, obviously they're having kids now, whether they put their kid through public or private, and there's actually really divided in between whether they would want the kids to go to public or private. But
we've actually been talking about it. We've been talking about that exact thing ourselves. Like, my wife and I have just had a baby. She's 9 months old, and we've been talking about what we're going to do. And we're both swaying towards private if we can afford it at the time. It's obviously a few years off yet, but I think a lot of it is there's probably not a drastic difference in education, I would say, if you're quite motivated to learn. But sport-wise, it's a huge difference. Like, you are getting activity every single day, which I don't think you're getting in state, really. So I think activity is obviously once a week. Yeah, which is just not enough. Like, so yeah, we're both for it. I can imagine it can be quite difficult in relationships. One's for it and one isn't.
You kind of mentioned there about sport being a massive part of your life growing up. I mean, was there any particular sports? The ones obviously I'm aware of is golf, but would you kind of enjoyed all the sports when you was younger?
Yeah, I just seem to have a real natural ability at sport. I don't know really where it came from, because my parents aren't sort of sporty. My brother isn't. None of my uncle or anything, no one really in my family is been that sporty. So it was quite random that I was or am. And like I said, I channeled a lot of the energy that I had in sport, and I would play everything that I was allowed to play. So a lot of football, rugby, hockey. The only sport I don't actually like is cricket. It's literally the only sport I cannot stand. It's just, I just can't.
I've heard it's fun to watch.
Yeah.
With the alcohol maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, I just can't. I just don't get it. It just seems too boring for me. Everything else I'm really into. And then my mum actually got me a golf lesson when I was 10 years old, down the road from where we lived. And I absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed it. So I just kept playing. And by the time I was sort of 12 years old, it was my main sport, really. I was focusing mostly on golf. I was already representing Dorset junior team, I think, when I was... Amazing. I played for the under 14s, under 16s and under 18s. And I actually played for Dorset men's, one of the youngest to ever play for Dorset men's team when I was 14 or 15 years old. So I got pretty good at golf quite quickly.
So you kind of found that passion kind of from a young age. Is golf quite a frustrating sport? I've heard that some days you could be amazing and then other days you can't even hit the ball, kind of thing.
It's a lot harder than people make it look. If you watch it on TV, you think, yeah, I can do that. You go down the driving range and it is hard. It's very, very hard. It's technically very difficult. The margin for error is very small. So if you are, if the club face only needs to be open by 0 or closed by 0.1 degree or 2 degrees, and the ball's going sideways. So it's very technically demanding. And it's, out of all the sport I've played, it's by far the hardest to be good at. It's very tough.
A lot of people say that. I've never really done it. I've done the driving range a few times, but I think it's a sport. If I think it's one of the sports you need to have friends interested in as well, where you go together. But maybe one day I'll get into it. From listening and kind of reading about yourself, James, you seem like a very kind of driven and a very kind of ambitious person. Is that something you would say you've had from a young age?
Yeah, I think from when I was in sport, even I always wanted to be the best that I could be. Very competitive. So I always wanted to win. That was just me. And I think golf was great for that because it is an individual sport. So whatever you put in, you're going to get out. Whereas a lot of other sports are team sports, aren't they? So I felt like golf was a great one for me because it was just all on me. If I put in the time, I was going to get better, and I just love winning. Like that is what used to motivate
Mentality
me.
kind of thing, yeah.
And it has transpired into what I do now. Like I have put in a lot of time, and I guess people sort of see the end result, don't they? And they think that it's been, you've got lucky or whatever it is, but it's been 6 years to this point. Like it's not a overnight thing. Like there's a lot of hard work that goes into these things.
I think a lot of people don't see that as well. I think with like the likes of like TikTok now, and you see people like blow up overnight and get the followers or get the sponsorship or the deals and the money and everything else what comes with it. And I think they always say like 3 years is the lucky number. I've heard it a few times. If you really kind of focus on something and you put your heart into it and you're really kind of consistent, then they say that 3 years is when you finally kind of get that lucky break. I was going to ask with your family as well, did they have much influence on yourself in terms of that drive? Because I know me personally, I get a lot of it from both my parents, but particularly my dad. Was there anyone in that kind of your life where you can kind of resemble why you are the way you are today?
I think both my parents are quite driven. My dad was quite successful in what he did in a few big companies, and my mum run her own hairdressing business. So like she's been, running your own business is very different to working for someone else. So like my parents have had both sides. My dad's been quite high up in the company, and then my mum's run her own business. So I think having both of their input has helped me as well. Because it is completely different when you're doing things on your own, and you've got to motivate yourself, and you've got to, the first few years that I did this, it wasn't about being a business. Like I only turned it into a business like about 2.5, 3 years into it. When we got married, I thought, okay, I set up the blog in 2016 and we got married in 2018. Hopefully I've got that right. And so about 2.5 years in, I think I realized, okay, like now I need to turn it into a bit more of a business, and the money side of it's never really driven me. It's always just like the like get what I get out of it from people making recipes and things like that. That's what motivates me.
Yeah, and I think more so now with people is that I think people kind of want that flexibility and that kind of freedom in it, working for yourself.
Yeah, it's really, there's a lot of freedom, but it's quite a lot of pressure to it as well. It's like, it's both of it. You can do things at different, like I don't need to work 9 to 5. I could do different timings if I want to, but again, if you don't put in the work, you're not going to get anywhere. So you have to be quite motivated.
Yeah, and it'd be great to kind of touch upon like obviously healthy living, James. When you set off obviously doing the recipes, would you say cooking's always been something from a young age you've always been quite passionate about, or something you've enjoyed doing?
When I was younger, I didn't really have a passion for food really. Like my mum's always been a keen sort of cook. She always a home cook. Like she's always experimented with recipes. She's been vegetarian for like 40 odd years. So like generally,
oh wow, people
that have been vegetarian for that long are generally more like into cooking, I think, because 40 years ago or 30 years ago, like you couldn't just buy ready-made vegetarian food. Like it wasn't a thing, I don't think. Bit like, obviously things have evolved so much. Now you can get what you want really, but generally she was keen home cook. So I always saw her cooking, but I never really sort of paid attention to it much or helped out, I would say. My passion only came when I was housebound. That was when my passion for cooking sort of came, because it gave me a focus really. But yeah, my parents are we're all very keen on food. Like as a family, whenever we have a family gathering, it's all revolves around food. Like we're all big foodies.
It's been a big part, yeah. Was there any like recipes what kind of remind you of home, or any like recipes from? Because like I remember, for example, if I have dumplings, it always reminds me of my grandma. But
yeah,
is there any family recipes which have had an influence on you?
No, not really. I'm not like remember. I just remember a lot of my childhood. My parents had a kitchen with an Aga in it, and in the summer we would turn that off because it was just too hot, because it heats the whole room. So I remember barbecuing. My dad used to barbecue all through the summer, like every night it was on the barbecue. So I really love barbecues now. That's all I can really remember.
That's pasta. I was going to say with obviously you kind of mentioned the kind of passion come obviously later on in life for you. If we kind of talk about the diagnosis and MS, I thought it's quite interesting in the lead up to that. Was there like any signs?
I had probably about a year before I was ill, I started having dizzy spells, but didn't really know where it was coming from or why. At that time, I was quite competitively playing golf, and it did affect me a few times.
Wow.
And then sort of a year and a half later, that was when I fell really ill. But there was no real warning signs. It was very much like I was fine one day and then I was very ill the next day. I went out for dinner with friends, just to a restaurant in Bournemouth. Woke up the next morning and I just felt really, really rough. I thought it was food poisoning because I was sort of sick for a week.
Yeah.
And it probably, thinking back, it probably was food poisoning that triggered it. And I was just, it's one of those where normally you sort of get better after 3 or 5 days or a week.
Yeah, a couple of days.
Yeah. And then I just wasn't getting better. Like it was lingering around for like 2-3 months where I just felt really ill all the time. And then I went on holiday with my parents up north somewhere, and I literally couldn't get out of bed. I felt so ill. And we came.
It's quite scary.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
it's quite scary, isn't it? How fast it kind of happened. When you had them dizzy spells, then did you go to the doctors, or did you just think, it's just I'm going through a bit of a phase, like it'd be fine? Like,
I can't remember if I went to the doctors back then. I literally can't remember. I mean, nothing. I wasn't. If I did, I wasn't. Nothing came up. There was no like reason that I knew that what was going on. So it wasn't.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I did go, but if I did go, there wasn't anything that came up. So, yeah, it was quite a very sudden thing from someone that was, so active. Like I said earlier, I had a lot of energy, could play, walk 2 rounds of golf in a day, 10 miles plus easy. It was very sudden change to then being pretty much overnight really ill. And that was when we came back off that holiday, and I just felt so ill, and I'd lost 2 or 3 stone in weight. I was really struggling. And I just said, my dad and my parents just said, that's enough, like we're going to take him to the doctors. And my dad had to actually carry me into doctor's surgery. That's how bad I'd gotten. And I remember I actually sat in the doctor's surgery and just said ambulance. That was the only word that I could get out. And then they rushed me in for a suspected brain tumour at that point, because I had multiple symptoms of it, which was very scary.
Yeah, because was speech one of them as well? Like
I was struggling to talk. Yeah, I couldn't. I think it was more energy related. Like I just had nothing in the tank. Like I was so exhausted. I couldn't really talk because of that. But it probably came across like, I was very slurry, and I literally just said ambulance. That was the only word that I could say. That's how exhausted I was. So I'd had obviously the loss of weight. There was multiple symptoms that they were very concerned about with that. And my doctor knew me very well as well, like, and was sort of knew my family, and he knew like how active a person I am. So for him to see me being carried in there, he knew like something wasn't right.
What was your like headspace during that point? I mean, because obviously you've gone to the doctors. I mean, they did all the scans. What did they kind of come back with? Did they actually find any kind of reassurance there?
I was kept in hospital for about 12 days and nothing was found.
That's mad,
Obviously the brain scans, everything was fine. All the tests that I had came back fine. So after about 12, I think it was 12 or 13 days I was in hospital for. And I think it was about day 5 or 6, I had a lumbar puncture. They wanted to do a lumbar puncture to take fluid from my spine to see if there was anything. I think that's how they tell whether things are quite serious, like virus related.
Oh wow!
And it's quite a scary thing to have done. Like they put a big needle in your back, and it's horrible. And halfway through, I thought I was going to faint, and they had to stop and take the needle out, and they then gave me pain medication to take away the pain in my back, and that was what I had anaphylactic reaction to. So I couldn't breathe.
Having a food allergy, obviously anaphylaxis is something which obviously I'm aware of, and I imagine some of the listeners as well. But was that your first time you went into anaphylaxis where your neck swells and you can't breathe?
Yeah, it was the first time. So I had a huge rash come up on my chest. My airway completely went, like I was gasping. Luckily I was in hospital. I literally couldn't imagine what people go through if they go have a reaction like that. Not in hospital. It would be horrific to go through that. Like, very, very scary experience. You don't know about, you don't really understand it until you've had that.
Yeah, because obviously I carry my adrenaline and my EpiPens, and but I know there's people I've had on the podcast who it happened to them. They didn't even know they had a food allergy.
Yeah,
there's like one story I read where a guy went for a seafood restaurant to celebrate his birthday. Didn't realize he's allergic to, I think, shellfish or whatever, or lobster. He went into anaphylaxis and unfortunately died because he wasn't aware, and it's scary. Yeah, but I can't imagine what you went through as well. Obviously, having the operation and that straight after. I mean, have you had any reactions to food as well?
So I've been
to that as well
hypersensitive. So it's quite a common thing with people that have been diagnosed with ME. Their whole sort of body is hypersensitive to a lot of different things: smell, taste, medication, supplements, all of it. Really hypersensitive. So I'd had a few sort of reactions to where I'd get like a rash to a few things when I was more in my that was after the hospital experience. So I'd only had that anaphylaxis once, but I'd had other sort of rashes and things like that happen. And then if I have dairy or eggs, I have just severe diarrhea, like not a anaphylactic reaction, but just a stomach related reaction.
I feel like that's like becoming more common now. Even I've cut out dairy. Even like obviously like I only have like oat milk now, and it's crazy. Obviously, I think education, because imagine back then, obviously people probably wasn't aware.
No.
What was the next steps then, obviously from the hospital? So obviously at this point they still hadn't actually found out what it was. You've just had the operation in terms of trying to see if it's a virus. What was kind of the next steps after that?
Was kept in for a few more days, like 5 more days after I had that reaction. Then basically I was told that there was nothing that they could find or do for me, and I needed to go home and rest. They thought it'd be a virus and that I had to just go home and rest and I would get better. So I went home. I was living with my parents at that time. This is when I'm 21, by the way. I was then in bed for 2 years from that point. So
2 years?
Yeah, it was a long time. And I actually had a few reactions, thinking about it now, I actually had a few reactions to other medication. Once put me back in hospital. It felt like I had fire going through my veins. Literally felt like I was going to explode. So I went back in once for that.
Yeah, no, honestly, I can't imagine kind of what you went through. If we touch upon them 2 years, so you was essentially bedbound in terms of like you didn't move, like you was literally like you couldn't do anything. Like.
Yeah, so those 2 years, the first 6 months I was at my worst. I wasn't able to have a light on really. I was very sensitive to light. I couldn't watch TV, read, text, write. I could hardly put a sentence together. So I was really struggling in that first 6 months. It was a pretty scary place.
Where was your headspace during that time? Because I can't imagine obviously being this like super active person. Like you said, golf was such a massive part of your life. For then for all that to be taken away and obviously not being able to move out of your bed. I mean, you must have gone through some pretty dark times, I can imagine.
Yeah, very, very tough. Like people always ask like, how did you make it through those few years? And it's one of those where I didn't have a choice. You know, you just gotta get through it, haven't you? Like you've just got to. I've always been quite positive, and I always felt like I was going to get better at some point. So I always tried to stay positive with that, but it was really tough. Like some days were really difficult, and it feels a lot of the days just merged into one because it's just such a long process. Like I know a lot of people, we've now been through sort of lockdown and things like that, and people have started to understand a little bit more what it's like to be confined to a space and then to actually feel really bad, really ill at the same time and actually be in bed. Like it was a really difficult time mentally, physically. I'd lost all my leg strength. Like I hadn't forgotten how to walk, but I really struggled to stand up for the first few months when I actually made it out of bed. I really struggled. Like my dad would have to effectively hold me while I walked. I'd lost all of my leg strength, everything. So yeah, it was a really tough time, and I didn't really allow many people to come and visit me because people knew me, what I was like before, and I just didn't want people to see me like that. It was just quite sort of depressing. I
thought that was quite an interesting point when you kind of mentioned that in terms of not wanting people. I mean, everyone's different. Do you feel like if people was there that you might have got that support to not like perk up, but do you know, imagine being on your own and then obviously you're not seeing people as well. It must have been like really hard. And obviously you kind of spoke about obviously not wanting people to see you in that way. I mean,
it was a bit of that.
You must have felt quite isolated in some ways.
It was isolating, but it was also I had no energy. So having someone around takes a lot of energy. Like even like now, if you're feeling, say like, you know, when you're really ill and you literally you just don't want to talk to anyone, right? Like you're just too tired. You feel awful. So a lot of it was that as well. Like I just didn't have the energy there to even do it. So it was a bit of both. Like one, I didn't want people to see me that way, and two, I just didn't have it in me. So yeah, it was a difficult time for that.
Yeah, I can't imagine obviously the experiences like kind of what you went through. I mean, before that moment as well, did you ever, obviously you've touched upon obviously like your mental health and kind of what you went through. Would you say that was like the first time you like really experienced it? Because I think it'd be quite hard I think if some people haven't experienced like either depression or anxiety or mental health, then it's quite hard for people sometimes to like resonate with that.
Yeah.
Did you have any experiences in prior to being bedbound in terms of like your mental health and your emotions?
No, not at all. I maybe had some exposure to it because I was playing quite big golf tournaments, and I remember I was getting more and more anxious before big tournaments, like as the pressure was growing. I remember I was getting a bit of anxiety then, but apart from that, no real exposure to it. So I was chucked in, properly into the deep end of it, as deep as you could go, really. Because obviously at this time, I was getting no real support from medical side. I was just told that I was diagnosed with ME after 6 months of being bedbound. And I was told
how come it took them so long?
That was just the criteria back then. I think it's more like 3 months now. They need to know that you've suffered with multiple symptoms for 6 months. So I was told that was what I had, and that there was no cure, and that I'd just have to rest and hopefully I'll get better. That was it.
That's insane, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's quite
like
scary.
Being in the hospital. Yeah.
So I didn't really know what was happening.
Is ME like genetics then? Like how, obviously you're a healthy guy, like this could happen to anyone. Like how does it happen? Is it genetics?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Like it's a very sort of understood thing. A lot of people, what has caused it for me, or the way that like my symptoms can be very different to someone else. So nobody really knows.
Yeah. What are them kind of main symptoms then? It would be kind of tiredness.
Yeah.
Dizziness.
Yeah. So
appetite,
I had.
Maybe, yeah.
It wasn't even tiredness. It's like extreme fatigue. Like the only way I can say it is when you feel your absolute worst. Maybe think back to like the worst you've ever felt in your life. It's probably worse than that. Like I had nothing in me. Like it was like I had like 1% battery, like when your phone's going to die. I was in a bad way. So you just have nothing there. So it was extreme fatigue, dizziness. I would actually have to put my mattress on the floor because I felt like I was going to fall out of bed. That's how dizzy I was at times.
Jesus.
So I felt safer being on the floor because I couldn't fall very far. And I never did fall, but I just felt that way. So I'd often have the mattress on the floor so I felt safer. Headaches, extreme sensitivity to light and smell. Like my mum couldn't even light a candle in the whole house because I would just react to it. Like I would smell it and it'd give me a headache, so I was, just hypersensitive to a lot of things. How
was that? I kind of wanted to touch upon, obviously you've been diagnosed with ME. They've obviously not really give you any information in terms of like how to get better.
No.
What was kind of like your headspace, like in terms of like how did your family how did you get through it as well as your family in terms of like, how am I going to get better? Like I can't imagine getting diagnosed with something and then there not being a cure. It must have been so scary. Like.
Yeah, it was difficult. Like after that diagnosis after 6 months, my mum she just sort of said that we're not accepting that as an answer. Like the answer I was given was sorry, my dog's barking.
That's all right. No worries.
We're not accepting that as an answer. Mum didn't accept that answer for me, that there was no sort of cure, and she booked for a nutritionist to come out and visit me. And obviously I was still severely bedbound at this point, so she would come out and sit in my bedroom and my mum would talk through what had happened, and she gave some suggestions. And I was so scared of I can imagine the people that are listening to this podcast that have had reactions to things, they'll understand you just get very scared about taking, especially if you've had a reaction to medication, I guess, or even food, like you are just scared of trying other things.
Yeah.
So I was, at this point, like I said, I had multiple reactions to a few different things, and I was too scared to take a vitamin C. I mean, that's the level that it got to. Like, no one cares about taking vitamin C. I mean, it's just nothing, right? So I was so scared that I'd get my mum to chop up a vitamin C into quarters because I was too worried about taking a whole one, just in case I reacted to it. So that was quite scary, but she told me to cut out gluten and dairy because they're quite inflammatory, and that needed to try and give my gut a chance to heal, plus take some supplements and a few other suggestions. And so that was kind of like a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. It just sort of gave some hope, I guess. And nothing was quick. Like it took another 18 months for me to get out of bed. But I slowly did see some progression over that 18 months.
I was going to say, obviously, like, it wasn't like, 18 months is a long time until you kind of see the results. Like, but day by day, did you just feel a little bit better by cutting out the gluten and dairy?
It wasn't day by day. It was kind of like some days I'd feel a little bit better, then the next I'd just feel back to normal again. And then, but it was just a very slow progression, like very, very slow. I'd say I saw 1%, 2% progression every 2 to 4 weeks. Like, it was just so slow.
Oh, wow.
And obviously at the time it's hard to know how much progress you're making. But it was, I mean, I remember the first time I stepped outside was well over a year in my bedbound stage. That was the first time I literally stepped outside. It just felt weird. Felt like the world was massive because I'd obviously been confined to 4 walls for so long. And a lot of people would have experienced that in lockdown, I guess. But when it's literally one bedroom, it feels even harder than, like, in lockdown you could move around your flat or your house or whatever. This was I was confined to one room for that period of time. So when I stepped outside, it was mad. Felt really weird.
Must have felt so surreal. And this was a time when you met your wife now.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So when I said I wouldn't allow people to come and visit me, I actually didn't generally want friends to visit me. Partly, like I said, I didn't want that sort of judgment. I felt less judged by people that didn't know me, in a way.
Oh, really?
So she came out to visit me occasionally at the start, and she would just sit there and just not really. She would just talk to me, and I wouldn't really talk back. And then, she just started coming more and more and just helping around the house more and more. Because my mum was my full-time carer for those 2 years that I was in bed, and my dad helped out massively as well. So they were like my full-time carers. So having Louisa around as well helped massively. And you said earlier, it gave me a bit of a boost as well that I needed, and motivation to try and get better.
Whereabouts did you guys meet in prior to Emmy?
So we had a mutual friend that we'd met a couple times through a mutual friend, but we'd never really spoken. And then she heard that through that mutual friend that I was in hospital. That was when I was in that first hospital stage. So she heard that I was very ill and just was texting. And then about 3 or 4 months later came round to see me. So she saw me in my absolute worst state. So
it's mad as well, because obviously like in prior to that, obviously you wasn't dating. It's not like you've been out for a few dates. Like you literally met through friends a few times, and now you've got. Have you got 2 kids together now?
No, one? Yeah, one.
Just one? Yeah.
Yeah, one's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
not another on the way then. This is not an exclusive on the podcast.
No, we've got one dog and one baby, and that's quite hard work as it is. So yeah, our first actual official sort of date, I guess you'd call it, was we went to a restaurant like 2 years after we met. 2 years after we sort of started dating effectively. So yeah.
When did she come round? Was it more of a friendship which kind of ended up into a relationship?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we were texting a bit, and it was more friendship at the start, because I was in a state as well, so it's like I'm not really dating potential. So I think she just felt sorry for me as well, which it was part of it. But yeah, we just got to know each other really well and clicked really well.
It's amazing actually, because
it's a different way of like getting to know someone.
Yeah, because obviously like what happens to yourself, James, is like awful, but then what actually come out of it is incredible. Like you've got a wife, you've got kids. And you would have never maybe formed that relationship if it didn't happen. So
no, that wouldn't. I mean, we'd both met before I was ill, so we wouldn't have probably ever spoken properly if it wasn't for what had happened. So we would, wouldn't. I wouldn't be here now without that. So yeah, amazing.
And you think she was massive in terms of like your mental headspace at the time going through this, and then it's nice to have someone there who cares for you.
Right? Yeah, I was really vital without that. Because like it was very mentally tough on me, but it was tough on the people around me as well. Like for my parents to see that, from me go from where I was, trying to become a professional golfer, and like very driven, energetic, to then being like I was, like I would say it was as hard for people around me to watch that. Now that I'm a parent, I couldn't imagine watching your own child go through that. It must have been horrific. Yeah,
it was so scary. I mean, how common is ME?
I think 250,000 people in the UK have it, or are diagnosed with it, but it's on different tiers. Like some people are extremely severe, that they're like I was for a couple of years. Some people are like that for their whole life. Like they don't really recover from that. So I was in that community for a while, like the ME community, and I found it quite depressing, because it was a lot of very sick people, and there wasn't much hope in that space, and I had to get myself out of it, because it was just too depressing. Like I needed to see positive stories, not hear how ill everyone was feeling, if you know what I mean. So it was quite a difficult thing to sort of just come out of that, because they feel like your support network in a way, but actually it was just making things harder for me.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think obviously like when you kind of spoke about your mindset being quite positive, like you don't want them people pulling strings at it kind of thing. If you're trying to keep your head above water kind of thing. It's actually the same within the Irish community. There's people which obviously they share the negatives all the time, and it's just like,
I mean,
I don't need to see that. Like,
that's the thing. Like that's a normal thing to happen in those type of spaces, but sometimes you just don't want to hear it, right? Like if you're struggling enough on your own, you don't want to take on anyone else's stuff as well. So
Yeah.
it's hard
Yeah,
enough to
'cause
get through it on your own.
Yeah, it's really tricky sometimes because I get a lot of people reaching out being like, and sometimes they don't want to respond. It's like, well, this has happened to me. And it's like, there's not much I can like, yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because obviously you want to help out, but then sometimes I think people just want like a soundboard, and it can be tricky sometimes to be like, you know what, you've got to set yourself boundaries sometimes.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, you can't be taking on everyone else's burdens as well as my own challenges, what's going on in my own life.
And that's happened via social media as well. Like that, it's so much easier now, isn't it, to get direct contact to someone and ask them questions. And it's great, but it's also quite tough to deal with on the other side. So
yeah, I had one the other day actually. He messaged me and was like, "You've not like responded to me, and it's in my DMs." And I was like, "It's not in my DMs of what?" And then I did have another look, and then it was like Instagram has hidden this message.
Oh yeah,
meaning it's probably like it could be anything like bad language or spam or pornographic. I don't know what this guy sent me.
Yeah,
but like, yeah, I was like, maybe I don't read that. I couldn't see it anyway. So yeah, I was going to ask about obviously Healthy Living James. Obviously, during kind of your journey with Emmy, that's when you kind of really got into cooking. And there was quite quick recipes, weren't they? Like 10, 15 minutes because of your energy levels at the time?
Yeah. So after that 2-year period, Louisa and I moved into an apartment together. She was out working and at university, and I was obviously at home. I was now gluten and dairy free. Like I said before, I hadn't really cooked much, so I was like kind of chucked in the deep end a bit with like having to cook to sort of survive really. So I quickly discovered a passion for it. Like it got me, so I was more housebound at this stage. I was in this stage for another 3 to 4 years where I was not in bed all the time. I was either sort of maybe sitting on the sofa, laying on the sofa, laying in bed, but at home 95% of the time. And it gave me a purpose of like a few times a day going to my kitchen, having a chair in the kitchen because I didn't have the energy to stand up. At this time, I was going, whenever I went out anywhere, I was in a wheelchair. Like I couldn't walk more than 50 or 100 yards. So whenever I went out anywhere, I'd need to be in a wheelchair. So I didn't have the energy in my legs or in me to stand up cooking. So I'd have a chair and I'd just sit down, chop, make recipes, and it gave me that purpose a few times a day. And it also even does now when I'm cooking or preparing foods, chopping, whatever, I don't think about anything else that's going on like around me. Like I sort of zone out. Good. It's been like quite a relaxing thing for me. Very therapeutic. And that helped me a lot in that time. And then after a few years, like friends and family said, "Oh, can you share a few of the recipes that you've made?" Or they might come round and I'd feed them and they would want the recipe. And it got to the point where after 3 or 4 years of doing it, I said I'll open a website and I'll put everything on there. And it took me 9 months to put 20 recipes on the website, I think, because I was just probably only 40% recovered at this point when I started the website. It took me a long time, and I decided that would be the best place. Like I can just write the recipe on there. Friends and family will have the website and they can just go and get what they want. I don't need to like text it to everyone.
Keep messaging everyone.
Yeah, it's hard work with that. So I thought that's the easiest place. And I thought, okay, I'll set up Instagram at the same time and Facebook, and those friends can follow it on there and they can just know when I've put up a new recipe, and then they can go to the website. There was no intention of like other people seeing it really. Like obviously I was posting it out to the world, but I didn't really expect anyone to see it. Not like it is now, like people that are, the recipe space has become really saturated and people are coming into the space knowing exactly what they're going to do. You know, they're coming in to build a following, want to create a recipe book, do brand jobs, all of that. Like, they're coming in knowing what they want to achieve from it. I had 6 years ago that there was none of that. Like, there wasn't even Instagram stories when I was doing it. Like, that's how long ago this was. So it was all just photos. That was it.
I was going to ask about how was that growth? It obviously wasn't overnight, but
yeah.
Was it something which steadily kind of happened, and you was like, oh, like people are actually now kind of going to my website or visiting my blog and doing these recipes?
I think I had the first 1,000 followers was in a month. First 5,000 I think was in a couple months. So it's quite quick. Like,
oh, wow.
It would be hard to grow that quick now, unless you have something that really pops off. So it was a lot easier then. I think maybe it was 10,000 in 3 or 4 months or something like that. So it did kick off quite a lot. And then I've had like,
was that from just posting pictures?
Yeah,
with the recipes.
Yeah, and yeah, there wasn't loads of people doing it back then. So like, if people were looking for food, or I think my story resonated with people. If people were looking for food, there wasn't loads of people doing it. So it was, you were kind of hitting, there was like a need for it, and I was sort of in there quite early. So it grew quite well from that, and I just didn't know what was going on. Like, I was like, why are these people like following? I didn't even understand what was going on. And then obviously after about 3 or 4 months, I realized that, okay, this is quite interesting. Like, I'm reaching a whole audience that I don't even know who they are. And that's so like common now, isn't it? Like, everyone knows that you're posting on Instagram to reach people that you don't know. Like, but that long ago, it really wasn't a big thing. Like, it really wasn't. Like, things have changed so much.
Crazy how like new platforms just keep popping up now, and video being, I feel it's crazy. Like, before it was like just do a post and write a long caption, but now like it's like you've got to create a video with music and captions and trending songs. Like,
it's a whole different space. It's been quite interesting to grow in it myself, because like I said, it went from photos, then stories started coming about, then it started to shift into video 3 years ago, and it really hasn't stopped. Like, it's just video now. And like I said, people are coming into it with intention of making money from it, like turning it into a job, whereas back then it really wasn't a thing.
How many followers was it until you decided maybe I should like monetize this and try and do this full time?
I think so. Like I mentioned earlier, when I got married, I felt like I needed to turn it into business. I probably was at about 50 to 70,000, I'd say, followers back then. So this is 5 years ago. So not huge, but obviously it's been a lot more common now for people to grow like 1 million followers in like 6 months. Like, that's quite common now on TikTok and places like that. Back then it was 70 odd thousand was pretty decent for that space. And then
how did you go about making that step? What was the first step in terms of you like monetizing it? Because I think it's one of them questions that it gets asked quite a lot, and it's really hard. It's like, do I do a cookbook, or do I do a product, or do I sell a service? Like, what was that kind of step for yourself?
I always wanted to, one of my main goals was to create a cookbook. I also started to get ads on my website, which is common for literally every single website you go on has ads. So I'd start to make a bit of revenue from that. I started accepting brand jobs. I turned a few down in the first couple of years because I just I wanted it to be quite a ad-free space, I guess. Like I just wanted it to be organic content. So I started doing some brand work. I tried to get a book deal 5 years ago. Didn't go to plan. So that was quite depressing at the time. And then I had really good meetings, and they just said that you weren't ready, and I went away from, well, I didn't get that feedback until a week after the meetings, but I sort of felt like, I was like, no, I am ready. Like, you've made a mistake, I'm ready. And now I brought out a book a year ago, and I look back and I wasn't ready. Like, I was way too early in my journey to bring out a cookbook.
Really?
Like, they are extremely hard work, demanding things to do. So I definitely wasn't ready back then, but at the time you don't see that, do you? You just sort of think I'm ready. So yeah, it was just mainly brand work, ad revenue on the website, and I did bring out an ebook. I think that I was selling copies of that, but apart from that, there was no like other sort of revenue that was from it. It was very sort of gradual growth, really.
Yeah. What is the main revenue now through like the cookbook and like the odd brand deal kind of thing?
Yeah, pretty much. So again, website, it's all the same really. Website, ad revenue, brand deals through social media, and the book that I did a year ago. That's all. It is literally all the same. It's just grown.
Oh, really? I was going to ask you, how long did it take you to kind of write the cookbook then?
I signed the book deal in March 2021, and the book came out in March 2022. So it took I had about 3 months to write all of the recipes. Then it needs to be, wow. It's quite a long process. Like, it's turning a cookbook around in a year is quite a quick turnaround. Often they're anywhere between 1 to 2 years to do. So I turned around the recipes quite quick, and this was like obviously lockdown through a decent part of this as well. So I would create the recipes, then I had to have, editorial stuff on them, then the photo shoot for the recipes and the book cover. So it is a very long process. And it's quite emotionally difficult throughout that period as well, because you're sort of like got a lot of expectations and you just want it to do well, and you're nervous because you don't know what it's going to come out like and how people are going to react, whether people are going to buy it. So yeah, was
you overwhelmed with the response? Was you really happy with the response to the cookbook when you launched it?
No, it's been even, people are still buying it now, and it's been out over a year. It's been an amazing journey. Like, it's something I'll always be very proud of, to walk in a Waterstones, and that was always my vision. Like, I wanted to walk into Waterstones and see my face on a shelf. Like, that was when I sort of,
why not?
Well, that was when I thought, okay, if I can do that, then I've done all right. Like, that was one of my big goals. I
mean, what's your goals now going forward? Obviously you've kind of hit one of them big goals of obviously launching that cookbook, but what's your goals for, what's the next big one on the agenda, you could say?
Surviving being a parent, I think, at the moment. It's it's I haven't really set any like other big ones. I always have been quite spontaneous. Like, the book one was always like, I always wanted to achieve that, and then when I have done that, the next one is just going with, like, I've always been someone that does just go with what happened, like the experience, and go with the flow of things. Like, I don't put too much pressure on myself, because my health is the most important thing to me, and I have been struggling since we've had the baby. Like, it's really put me under strain, like running your own business with a health condition, getting lack of sleep, things dramatically change in your life. it has been a difficult like 9 months for me, to be honest. So it's kind of like taking each day as it comes, doing the best that I can, and just trying to enjoy it as well. Like that's the main thing, because as soon as you don't enjoy something, there's no point doing it, is there? So I'm trying to still keep the passion with that, and I'd love to obviously create more books and do other things in the future.
It's interesting what you say about passion, because obviously when you started off it was never for the money, but I think that's where most people do. The successful people, it always starts off with that passion and that drive, and then it always ends up being something they get paid to do then, kind of thing. Like,
yeah, because you've got
the same with the podcast, like
you have to have the passion to turn up and do it. Like, you know, you're doing this podcast off your own back, you know, on an evening in the week. You don't need to do that, right? Like you're doing it because you enjoy having the conversations with people and learning things and sharing it with other people. Like you wouldn't be doing it if you didn't enjoy it. Like you have to, you know, I enjoy standing there and cooking, and I'm just fortunate that I've managed to turn it into a job. But if I lose that passion for it, then I'm not going to want to do it. And I have had ups and downs throughout the whole process of the 6 years. Like sometimes I'm just like, oh, there's too much like pressure. I don't know what to create. Like I've suffered with like content burnout. Yeah. It's a lot more, social media is a lot more demanding now than it ever used to be. Like photos, we were saying, photos are so easy to churn out. Now it's like, you know, videos, you've got to, you know, turn up, you've got to have energy, you've got to be on camera, you've got to be quite creative. It's a hard space to be now. Like it's a lot different to what it used to be. So it's mad, isn't it? It's fun, but it's also tough.
Yeah, it's like even doing the podcast, because I'm doing this, I can't do more specific allergy content because I'm so like working on the podcast, and then I'll be scheduling like 2 shorts on TikTok, 2 shorts on YouTube shorts like every night.
Yeah.
So it's mad, isn't it? Like it's crazy, like what happens behind the scenes, and more so with yourself, like obviously doing the recipes and everything. But honestly, James, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the.
Yeah, a lot of people don't see that side of social media.
Yeah, all the kind of the behind the scenes, really. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, James, having you on the podcast to kind of share your journey, and obviously it's super inspiring. Obviously what you've been through to where you are now, and obviously with the cookbook and the blog, and obviously having 1 million followers across your platforms, absolutely incredible. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me on the show, Dan, and hopefully this like chat can help some other people. And if they want to check out the recipes, it's across all platforms is at Healthy Living James, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and then the website's healthylivingjames.co.uk. And like I said, the book is available on Amazon, and
I'll make sure to leave a link, guys, in the podcast description if you want to find that out. And I'm sure that I'll be tagging it into my Instagram stories when the podcast launches. Probably in the next few weeks, we'll see what my schedule looks like. But yeah, honestly, James, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.